Well, thank you. Thank you all. It's a great honor to be here to Tucson's premier theater. And the venerable tradition of presenting one Shakespeare play every year. So, we have Twelfth Night. Twelfth Night is it's a comedy. And I want to make a few comments about comedy in general, and then move to Twelfth Night in particular. Shakespeare, the canonical assembly of his plays is 36, 37 or so, depending on whether we want to call some that are collaborative by him or not. And in the first folio, the great collection was published in 1623, 7 years after he dies. The plays are divided into comedies, histories, and tragedies. Comedies, histories, and tragedies, in that order. And there are 15 comedies, 10 histories, and 11 tragedies. So that suggests that Shakespeare was interested in comedy, perhaps to a greater degree than he was interested in histories, perhaps even greater than he was interested in tragedies, as almost counterintuitive as that might seem. And so I want to attend in particular to some of the distinctive features that we have in comedy as a dramatic form as we turn to Twelfth Night and see what he does with some of those distinctive features. Of those 15 comedies, 10 are what we have come to call, 10 are what have come to be called romantic comedies. Romantic comedies. Take the adjective first. Romantic. That refers to the material. To put it crudely, the story that is involved in the comedies. And that story, the principal story usually, the principal story has to do with a romantic relationship between a man and a woman, a love relationship. More important, really, even than the story, is the plot of comedy. And indeed, we can say that the plot of comedy is what distinguishes comedy as comedy. We think of comedy as something that makes us laugh. Well, Dante's Divine Comedy doesn't exactly elicit enormous humor. I mean, Dante didn't take the phrase Divine Comedy, but an early commentator did. What distinguishes a comedy as a comedy, really, and this doesn't change if it goes into narrative or theater or drama. What really distinguishes a comedy as a comedy is the shape of the comedy. And the shape of the comedy, the shape of the plot of the comedy is what is distinctive. And I'll come back to this as we proceed. What we have is a plot. The word in Greek is muthos, which begins in disorder, begins in disarray, begins in opposition, and moves through a development, moves through complication to a resolution. In short, the boy gets the girl, and usually it's more than one boy and usually more than one girl. And so it is that which is key to comedy as a dramatic form and differs from tragedy accordingly. Attendant upon that, particularly as Shakespeare writes romantic comedy, attendant upon that is the complexity of the plot. And I'm going to use the word plot to refer to the action. And on the handout that I believe you all have, on the first page, in a rather bloodless way, I've if not diagrammed, schematized the plot of Twelfth Night. And what I've done, one may do it other ways, I suppose, but what I've done in the first instance is to divide the play in two, and I use the word strands of action. Strands of action. And I like that idea because it conveys the notion of a sequence. And what we have in Twelfth Night are two principal strands of the plot, strands of action. And without reading all of the details, you can just stand back and see how it is so divided. And there is not much mixture, there's not much overlap between these two strands of action until we get to Act 5. And in Act 5 we have one scene, and in that scene we have virtually all of the characters on stage for the entire scene. They come and go, and right at the very end, or right before the point of the very end, the stage clears except for one character. And that's a very important character in the play, and that is the wonderful creation, Festi, the singing clown, the singing jester. And we'll talk more about that as we go forward. Now, what I would like to do is to look with you here in a little more detail to see what we have. We have on our left side what I call love interests of the principal characters. The love interests of the principal characters. And the principal characters are, starting at the top of the social, economic, political scale, Duke Orsino, followed by Viola, followed by the Countess Olivia, and Sebastian, who is Viola's twin brother, who's relatively, and so far as lines given to him, relatively minor in this part of the action. On the other side, we have what I please myself to call the festivity interest. The festivity interest of Sir Toby, Maria, Festi, the clown, Malvolio, and others who are relatively secondary. So we have complexity. Not only do we have not one but two plots, but we have characters aplenty. We have probably, you can count it various ways because some of the characters double, and certainly did in Shakespeare's day, probably 18 or so speaking parts. So there's a lot going on in the play. And this is characteristic of comedy, as Shakespeare writes it. This is characteristic of the romantic comedy. If you consider the tragedies, they're relatively simple by comparison. We don't have more than one principal strand of action in any of the tragedies except for King Lear. So this richness, this multiplicity, this copiousness that we see and that we'll see on stage is very characteristic of romantic comedy, and we can see, and we shall see, how it is put together. One further point on this, and then we'll move to one other detail and then turn to the play proper. I've put down Act 1, Act 2, and so on, and the scenes. This, of course, this division is from the text, from the earliest text that we have of the plays. There were no intervals in Shakespeare's day. And this division is a textual matter rather than a stage matter. And I cite it in this way to give you an idea of the distribution. And what is interesting is there are 2,589 lines in the play. This is the sort of thing that English teachers do on the weekend. And it's divided in a very interesting way. It's divided so that there are 1/3 1,034 lines in the love interest strand, and 1,128 in the festivity interest strand. So they're just about equal. In the last scene of the play, this doesn't count Act 5. In the last scene of the play, Act 5, we have 408 lines. So it has a kind of symmetry that is not completely obvious. Doesn't hit you over the head as we watch it in the theater. And this is so for another reason. As you can see, there are 6 scenes in the festivity interest, and 6 scenes in the festivity interest, and 11 scenes in the romantic interest strand of the action. So there are almost twice as many scenes in which we see the love interest unfold as there are in the festivity interest, but the quantity is just about the same. Now, one further but very important point. If you look on the our right-hand side, you will see that none of these scenes occur in the festivity interest, occur in sequence. In other words, what we see is an intermeddling of romantic interest scenes and the festivity interest scenes, and so we watch Shakespeare compound, I use the word advisedly, compound the multiplicity of action in the whole play. So this is a play that really moves. It has a lot going on, and a lot that goes on. One phase will differ in pace from the other. It is dynamic. There's a great deal that will slow down. There's a great deal that is quiet, and there's a great deal that is just full of rat-a-tat-tat. We have songs. We have snatches of songs. We have 7 songs, and we have snatches of something like 18 songs, which were all prior to none of them has Shakespeare composed himself, the lyrics, and almost certainly not the music. So the richness here, the richest here is evident. Now, the one further part that I'd like to allude to here. If you turn your page in the handout, this is page 2 on the handout, I've schematized the whole thing, not vertically, but horizontally as well. And I've described it as tripartite, and I have used a metaphor that I borrow from music. I do this because, of course, I like music, but I do it because Shakespeare likes music, and I do it because there's more music, or more songs in Twelfth Night than there are in any other of Shakespeare's play. And so I call the 3 parts 3 movements. And the first movement is introductory, and I call it the setting of the action. And the second I call the unfolding of the action and its complication. And the third I call the resolution of the action and Festi's song, which is if we could take all the parts that we would say are not completely necessary to Twelfth Night and remove them, the last one that we would remove would be Festi's song at the end, which we shall hear this afternoon. Now, I want to say, in addition to all this, is that the pace is dynamic. We will have these quiet moments. We will have these lyrical moments, sometimes literally lyrical, when we have singing. And then we will have things speed up. And then they'll slow down again. That's what I mean by dynamic. It is, to use a romantic term from romantic literature, it is organic. It's not static. It keeps moving. So now, we can ask ourselves, what does all this have to do with anything? It has to do with everything. It has to do with everything. The first thing I would say it has to do with is practicality. Shakespeare was a practical man of the theater. He made more money, it's quite certain. He made more money than any of his colleagues. So what he was interested in was the box office. He did not care. There's some argument about this, but I think it's probably misguided. There's some indication that he might have concerned himself with printing, but in those days, in fact, until the late 18th, early 19th century, authors did not make money from selling their text, whether it was a play or whether it was a novel or whether it was poetry. What they made money from, what the theater people made money from, the playwrights, was from the box office. So Shakespeare was concerned to keep his audience with him. And structure was important to them. Shakespeare is plain when we let him be. And if you turn back to page 1, I know this doesn't sound as if we're making progress. If you turn back to page 1, you can see how this works. Very systematically. In Act 1, we see that the principles are introduced. The principles are introduced. Orsino, his circumstances, he's in love with a woman who doesn't return his love. We have another woman appear on the scene, and we're introduced in this very expository, very plain way. So with the festivity interests, we have Sir Toby introduced. Sir Toby seems to drink at least 22 out of the 24 hours of the day. The time of day seems to make no difference to him whatsoever. And we are introduced this way. And this happens, we have the introduction completed, and in both cases what we see is the unfolding of plots. The unfolding of plots. And frequently that unfolding of plots is generated by what we describe as dramatic irony. That is to say, we have characters on stage among whom levels of awareness are in discrepancy, are different. So we'll have one character knowing much more than another character, or one set of characters knowing much more than another set of characters. And of course, we in the theater know everything. And we will see how Shakespeare uses this to great advantage. And so the question I want to move to now is, what is the purpose of such division? What is the purpose of such a combination of two strands of action? Well, what we watch is one episode juxtaposed with another episode. Or really, to be more precise about it, we have one episode occur, and then we have another episode occur, and the occurrence of the episodes bear on one another in a very different way. And this makes for even a deepening of the complexity and the variety. It has a great deal to do with the deepening of the theatrical interest. To put it crudely, we want to know what's going to happen. How is this going to work out? It has a great deal to do with the deepening of the psychological interest, and that's what we have in comedy, which is not what we think of perhaps at the first moment. That for all its conventionality, for all of its typicality, we have a great deal of inquiry into what people think and how they feel. And so let me look with you at two passages to sort of test some of these claims, or to illustrate some of these claims. The first is a passage that I have labeled labeled quotations with numbers. And this is this first passage that I want to look at with you is on page 3 of the handout. This is from Act 2, Scene 4, which is a wonderfully rich scene. And we're only going to look at a little bit of it. But what we will look at, first of all, is the song. And the scene is this. Orsino is at court. Viola has arrived. She's gone into disguise. And this, we shall see, is really essential to the way Shakespeare works. Because in disguise, she disguises herself as cross-dressing. She describes herself as a boy, as a young boy. And as things unfold, this young boy ingratiates himself or herself into the favor of Orsino, the great Duke of Illyria. And whether or not there is involved homoeroticism is debatable. We tend to think more that there is a touch of this, at least in Twelfth Night these days, and we used to. But it is debatable. In any case, what we see is Viola being able to talk to Orsino in a way that no one else can, and talk to him intimately. And so this is one of several scenes in which we see a conversation unfold before our eyes. And it is dramatically ironic because, of course, Orsino is talking to what he assumes to be a male who is really a female, and he's talking to this male who is really a female about the woman he loves who does not return his affection and which is breaking his heart. And as this happens, she or he or she is falling in love with Orsino. You see, we want to know how this is going to sort itself out. So this is why we call it dramatically ironic. Now, at this moment in this conversation, Orsino is saying to his courtiers, where is this clown? He sang a song the other night that I really liked because it eased my pain that I am suffering from. It eased my pain. This actually has a long history behind it of music being medicinal, being curative. And so if you look on page 3 of our handout and item number 3, here is, we'll hear this song in a moment, here are the lyrics, here is the poem that Feste sings to Orsino. This is on the first column, our left-hand column. Come away, death, and in sad cypress let me be laid. Fly away, breath, I am slain by a fair, cool maid. My shroud of white stuck all with you, oh, prepare it. My part of death, no one so true did share it. Not a flower sweet, on my black coffin let there be strown. Not a friend, greet my poor corpse where my bones shall be thrown. 1,000 sighs to save, lay me, oh, where sad true lover never find my grave too weak there. Now, this is what was called a lover's complaint. He's complaining about the unrequited love. And it rests on an ideal. The lyric rests on an ideal. And that ideal is the ideal of pure romantic love that is so deep that the lover cannot live without his beloved. Cannot live. And as so often, this is a convention, of course, as so often, conventions like this in poetry particularly have some sort of basis in fact, No one would choose to love someone who doesn't love him or her in return. It's not very pleasant. Whether it would drive one to the grave or not is another matter, but that's the idea. That's the idea that is being exploited in this case.
Come away, death, and in sad cypress let me be laid. Fly away, breath. I am slain by a fair, cruel maid. My shroud of white stock all with you. Oh, prepare it, my part of death. No one so true did share it. Not a flower, sweet, on my black coffin let there be stroke. Not a friend, greet my poor corpse where my bones shall be thrown. 1,000 sighs to save, lay me over, sad true lover, never find my grave to weep there.
So why does Shakespeare include this? Why does he? What does he get out of it, dramatically speaking? Well, you notice, of course, we read the poem. The poem is in verse. The language of the romantic interest strand of action is almost entirely in verse. And much of it, depending on what is being declaimed, much of it is rhymed in this way. In fact, at moments in the otherwise blank verse, unrhymed verse, there will be moments where it will be rhymed in order to bring out particular points of reference. Here, by setting it, as we say, by setting it to music, Shakespeare deepens, enriches the statement. We can hear it even if we have, as we say, stone ears. We can hear it here, the mode, as we say in music, the minor key, appropriate to the funereal cast of this. And I use the word funereal advisedly because if you go through, we have all this reference to dying, to being enclosed in a coffin, being buried, and the rest of it. It's about desolation. It is about hopelessness. It is about despair, the giving up of hope. It's about the ultimate in isolation and alienation. It's about death. And in fact, in Twelfth Night, we have ever so much in the way of reference to death and dying and the funereal. So this song is sung. This song is sung. And at this point in the scene, Orsino says now to the rest of his courtiers, leave us alone. Leave us alone. And when he is alone with Viola, when he is with Viola and wishes to speak about matters that are intimate, he always dismisses the rest of his courtiers. So let me read just a bit of this to you. What he has done is to say to Viola, I want you to go to my beloved and make my case. I have sent messages to her. She won't listen to me. She's got this idea that she wants to be in mourning because her brother just died a few months ago. Wants to be in mourning for seven years. This is a tough sell, but I'm sure you can do it much better than I can. So as you can see, the richness of the comedy and the irony just keeps proliferating, and she does sell it because Olivia will fall in love with her. We'll see how that works out. So he says to her, after listening to this song, he says to the rest of the courtiers, leave us alone, we want to talk. And he says, now I want you to go to her again. So let me read this speech to you. This is number 4 on page 3. Orsino says, get thee to yon sovereign dame, cruelty. Tell her my love more noble than the world. But if she cannot love you, sir, I cannot be so answered. Sooth, that means in truth. Sooth, but you must. Say that some lady, as perhaps there is, hath for you love as great a pang of heart as you have for Olivia. You cannot love her. You tell her so. Must she not then be answered? There is no woman's sighs can bide the beating of so strong a passion as love doth in my heart. Make no compare, means comparison of course, make no compare between the love a woman can bear me and that I owe Olivia. But I know, what dost thou know? Too well what love women to men may owe. In faith they are as true of heart as we. My father had a daughter, loved a man, as it might be, perhaps, were I a woman, I should, your lordship. And what's her history? A blank, my lord. She never told her love, but let concealment, like a worm in the bud, feed on her damask cheek. She pined in thought, and with a green and yellow melancholy she sat like Patience on a monument, smiling at grief. Was not this love indeed? We men may say more, swear more, but indeed our shows are more than will, for still we prove much in our vows, but little in our love. But died thy sister of her love, my boy? I am all the daughters of my father's house, and all the brothers too, and yet I know not. Sir, shall I to this lady? Aye, that's the theme. To her in haste, and give her this jewel. Say my love can give no place, bide no deny. So he gives her jewel. He may give her a ring and ask Viola, who's taken the name of Cesario, to take the ring as if it's an engagement ring. Now, the complexity and the sophistication, the fine details here, are made possible and theatrically convincing because of the disguise. Because of the disguise. And the interest that is generated. What's going on in her heart? What's going on in her mind? She's having to press the suit of a man she loves to another. And yet at the same time it is quite evident, there's no doubt, that she is not only deeply in love with him, but she's deeply sympathetic. She feels sorry for him. Talk about being conflicted. Feels sorry for him that he is suffering as he is. How can this be resolved? She can say, well, let me tell you something. There's something that we need to talk about. Well, it can't be done. And she gets close, it would seem, almost, when she says, after he's nattered on in this, dare I say it, male way about how strong his love is, and says, no one can love no woman can love as deeply as I do. And she says, but I know. Is she going to say, I know a woman who does? and it happens to be me. And she varies the situation by saying, I know too well what love women to men may owe. And you may notice incidentally there how it's rhymed, so we hear that emphasis. Right before us. Now, we could go on because this is so rich and so suggestive. Shakespeare is doing what? He is displaying, he is analyzing, he is plumbing the feelings of one of the most elusive of human experience, and that is of being in love. The way I see her, she's falling in love ever more with him as she sees him suffering. As she sees him suffering. It reveals to her what he is capable of. What it is capable of. Ironically enough, we can say that this is an intensely realistic, because it is so psychologically fit, a depiction. Now, what happens, and this I will go over rather briefly, what happens is in the next scene, we see something that is ostensibly very, very different. We have this guy Malvolio. Malvolio is a stuffed shirt. He is, as we used to say in the 60s, I guess in the 60s, he's buttoned down and buttoned up. And what he does is aspire. He's a steward. And he aspires, preposterously enough, to the hand of Olivia, his mistress, the Countess. It's not going to happen. It's not going to happen. He's not stupid. He is craven. He is ambitious. All of a sudden, this is really sounding very recognizable, very realistic. So he leans on Toby and the rest. And as he leans on them, they say, we've had enough of him. What we're going to do is we're going to give him just enough evidence to make him think that Olivia is in love with him. And what we're going to do is we're going to drop a letter that will say, I'd really like to see you in, and then describe the most preposterous kind of garb. And they watch him behave this way. So we have this dramatically ironic situation, which in its way is very theatrical. Just as what we watch with Orsino and Viola is very theatrical. We have two, as it were, plays going on. Shakespeare is generating our interest, is keeping us with him. Now, they watch him in this speech, and he comes on and they hide. We can see them off stage or to the side, and he's walking around and he's saying to himself, Count Malvolio. Thinking, of course, if he marries her, he will become a count. And he goes on fantasizing in this way. So we have in both the love interest and the festive interest strands of action, we have love. But only in one do we have really love. And the preposterousness, the sordidness, and all of the rest of this, in the case of Malvolio, does nothing except deepen through its shadows the love of Viola. And she is the one character whose understanding and awareness extends beyond virtually all of the other characters. She is the hero of the play. And this is the case with a romantic comedy. It's a woman's world rather than a man's world. So as we move forward, you can imagine and those of you who remember the play know the wonderful intricacies of plot and so on, and how intermetal they become. Watch very carefully what happens to Malvolio, because it moves, as does really the romantic plot as well. It moves gradually, step by step. Things get deeper and deeper. And at the end with Malvolio, he is duped, he is gulled to such an extent that he is described as mad, and he's incarcerated. That's the way hospitalization worked in the 16th century, the 17th century, for those who were suffering from mental illness, and is put in the dark. And we really watch as they torment him, it moved to something beyond a joke, to something that can be described as cruelty. He is all but disintegrated in his personality. So what happens? What happens is the play moves to the end. And what happens at the end is things get sorted out. Things get sorted out, and what is most important, Orsino decides that really, when he discovers that Cesario was really Viola, that he could fall in love with her, and they are betrothed. So with, what are we going to do now with Olivia? Well, Olivia fell in love with the twin sister of what happened to be a man, and they just happen to look alike. So he turns up, and well, you know how this is going to go down. She says, all right, let's do it. In fact, she is very aggressive in her attentions to Sebastian, his name is. So we have two couples who are betrothed. And they are related all, one to the other, by romantic love and then matrimonial love, and they're related to each other by marriage. So that is the idea. And the rest sort of sort themselves out. Malvolio is brought on. And this is almost unique in romantic comedy. He feels put upon. He has been humiliated, and he storms off stage and he says, I am vowing revenge on the pack of you. Revenge. Hatred. There's no reason to think that he is still prowling around somewhere trying to get revenge on the rest of them. Revenge isn't usually seen in romantic comedy. Revenge is associated with tragedy. Indeed, Shakespeare writes the greatest revenge tragedy ever written, Hamlet. He has finished Hamlet about 6 months before he begins writing Twelfth Night. Shakespeare pushes the boundaries. He forms and he reforms and then he reforms again. He is endless. Speaking of ends, we look to the end of the play. We have this resolution that I briefly described. And then we have the stage clear, except for one character, and that is Feste. And Feste is given this song. And here are the lyrics to this song. This is on page 4. When that I wasn't a little tiny boy with a hay high and the wind and the rain, a foolish thing was but a toy, for the rain it raineth every day. But when I came to man's estate, with a hay-ho, the wind and the rain, 'gainst knaves and thieves men shut their gate, for the rain it raineth every day. But when I came, alas, to why, with a hay-ho, the wind and the rain, by swaggering could I never thrive, for the rain it raineth every day. But when I came unto my beds, with a hay-ho, the wind and the rain, with tosspot still had drunken heads, the rain it raineth every day. A great while ago the world was begun, with a hay-ho, the wind and the rain. But that's all one. Our play is done, and we'll strive to please you every day.
When that I was and a little tiny boy, with the hay-ho, the wind and the rain, a foolish thing was but a toy, for the rain it raineth every day. But when I came to man's estate, with the hay-ho, the wind and the rain, 'gainst knaves and thieves men shut their gate, for the rain it raineth every day. A great while ago the world begun, with the hay-ho, the wind and the rain. But that's all one, our play is done, and we'll strive to please you every day.
Thank you so much. So what do we have? What do we have at the end? We have a poem, and the poem is an account of man's inexorable progress from a child's holiday, the first stanza, a holiday, a realm of irresponsibility and innocence, and it goes through to the age, into age, vice, disillusionment, and by implication, to death. Thus, Feste addresses us, the audience, directly, and so forms a bridge from the world of the play, to the world that we live in, to the world of the wind and the rain. And thus, Feste tells us that the play is done, that we must leave the world of the play. We must, like all of the characters except for the two married couples, leave Illyria, that realm of enchantment and love and timelessness, that land where there is no rain and there is no wind. In response to Feste's implicit request for applause, and this is the convention where one character will come out at the end of the romantic comedy and ask for applause. In response to this, we do so, and we extend to him, we applaud the play by extension, and his fellow actors, and we applaud him, which means to give thanks and to give praise. And then we rise as the lights go up, we turn away from the special community, the unique community of drama and audience. And we leave the theater to go out to University Boulevard, where there is, if not actually, as much rain and as much wind as there is anywhere. There we will necessarily deal with the harsh facts of existence which Feste has pointed to. About these facts we can do little. But we do not leave empty-handed. Do we have answers to the play that raises? Do we have protection against the wind and the rain? Not really, or not entirely. What we do have is the experience of the play, of seeing the representation of grief and joy, and hear the singing of songs. We have, in addition, the knowledge that Feste reassures us of, that all the theatrical performers will continue to work to please us every day. We can, in other words, return to the theater, and we will all return to the row, knowing well that we will be refreshed, knowing well that we will be entertained, and perhaps even a little enlightened. So therefore, above all, let us enjoy the show. Thank you all very much.